Speak to the earth, and it shall teach thee. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau here in Texas, where it's finally getting warm. Finally. It's getting a little warmer.
Yeah, sadly, yes. Sadly,
yeah.
yes.
We went past the equinox, and it's definitely, we can tell, that spring is here. Everything is blooming. But speaking of the equinox, we have an awesome freaking interview for you guys. It is an interview we did with Mr. Randall Carlson, which is amazing. And I'm going to read an introduction of him. I got this from Graham Hancock's website. So, but we have some other stuff to tell you about this interview after I read this introduction. So most of you know this, but I'm going to read it anyway. Randall Carlson is a master builder and architectural designer, a teacher, geometrician, geomythologist, geological explorer, and renegade scholar. He has 4 decades of study, research, and exploration into the interface between ancient mysteries and modern science. He has been an active Freemason for 30 years and is past master of one of the oldest and largest Masonic lodges in Georgia. He has been recognized by the National Science Teachers Association for his commitment to science education for young people. The acclaimed 1997 TBS CNN documentary Fire from the Sky was based upon his research into earth change and catastrophic events. He has organized several dozen field expeditions documenting evidence for catastrophic earth change. He has received academic recognition for outstanding work as a student of geology. His work incorporates ancient mythology, astronomy, earth science, paleontology, symbolism, sacred geometry and architecture, geomancy, and other arcane and scientific traditions. For over 25 years, he has presented classes, lectures, and multimedia programs synthesizing this information for students of the mysteries.
Fascinating library or body of work.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
sadly, when we began the interview, it began just this way. And yet, due to technical difficulties, I think on our end and bad internet connection, when we introduced Randall and then he says hello, it was like, meep, 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 meep.
Yes.
Couldn't understand anything.
Yeah.
So we overcame adversity and called him on a landline.
Right.
When all new technology fails, use a landline.
Right.
Use old technology.
Right. So we tried the internet connection. We got that working, but it was just so glitchy. And then we ended up just saying, you know what, Randall, let's just call you on your landline, and after that, he sounded great.
Yeah.
So
thanks to Randall for putting up with all of that in the beginning of the show.
Yeah. Thanks for sticking with us.
Sticking it
through all the technical difficulties. But
yeah, that cataclysmic initial start there.
Yeah, that's right. It was a total cataclysm at the beginning there. And the Watcher was present for this show. He is not present now when we are recording this intro, but he was there and he was on the line with us for most of it, be able to listen to Randall. And so I can't introduce him now because he's not here, but he was there and he was paying attention and he had some great input towards the end. So,
yep. All right. So here you go, folks.
Right.
Randall Carlson.
So yeah, what have you been?
Sure, sounds good.
What have you been working on most recently? What's your what aside from your day job? What are you looking at most recently with all of this stuff?
Well, let's see. Mostly, I guess lately I've been looking a lot at volcanism and solar-related things. I'm trying to learn more about the sun and its role in global change. So yeah, and volcanism. So those have been 2 things that I felt were kind of weak in my overall concept of global change forces. So I've been spending a lot of time learning more about both of those things, which are actually quite interesting, as it turns out, and very significant and critically important in understanding the kind of things that have caused global change in the past, are causing global change now, and will continue to do so into the future.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's always seemed like the sun, if you look at the whole system, you're like, yeah, so the sun is everything when it comes to global climate change and anything like related to that. I mean, the sun is the reason we have climate. Right. We wouldn't have climate without it. We would be a frozen ball of rock solid ice. Even the gas would be frozen solid without the sun.
Yep. That's right. So, I think that's going to be, we're going to find out. Well, what's been going on essentially the last few decades is that solar scientists have been learning more and more about the sun due to all of the various satellite-based observations that have been underway for the past quarter century, roughly, and have been learning a lot of things that are now known about the sun that were not known 25 and 30 years ago in the pre-satellite era. And what that is basically revealing is that the sun is a much more dynamic celestial body than anybody had assumed a generation or two ago, and it has tremendous significance and bearing on the question of climate change. But the problem is that generally the sun is being discounted in all of the grand dozens of computer models that have been done to create climate projections based upon carbon dioxide forcing. The sun has basically been relegated to the sideline, if not eliminated or ignored altogether, which is one reason why the model projections are constantly coming out wrong.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what exactly in volcanism are you looking at? Are you just looking at how it may, because I know that you've talked about how large impact events may cause like this massive resurgence of volcanism all over the world. Is that what you're talking about, or?
Well, yes, I definitely think there's a relation because yes, big impacts do cause volcanism, and it could be that a lot of the volcanism from the last 10,000, 11,000 years is a consequence of the series of impacts that now appear to have bombarded this Earth at the end of the last ice age, because there was such tremendous geomorphic work that went on the surface of the Earth that it had to have effects in the subterranean regions of the Earth, because you had I did the calculation once. I don't remember off the top of my head. It was an enormous number, calculating the number of metric tons of glacial ice that were mantling North America during the end of the last ice age. An enormous, just inconceivable amount of weight. Well, obviously, if you've got an ice sheet that reaches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific and from the northern United States to the Arctic Circle and maybe up to 2 miles thick at its center, it's going to weigh a lot. And because of that weight, what it does is it pushes the surface of the Earth down into the mantle. There's a bending of the surface of the Earth called Isostatic Depression, and basically it's just like the analogy I always use is just like if you sit down on a chair with a cushion. Are you guys sitting on chairs right now with cushions?
We are.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, so your asses right now are demonstrating the principle of isostatic depression. So if you were to stand up, the cushion rebounds to some extent, right?
Right.
And then if you sit down, it depresses, right? Well, the weight of your body is causing isostatic depression of the cushion. And then when you stand up and your weight is removed, then the cushion will rebound in a process called isostatic compensation or isostatic rebound, right? So this has been studied. We were talking about the Bonneville flood earlier, and for example, if you go into the basin of the Great Salt Lake around Salt Lake City, you can see shorelines up on the mountainsides. Now the shorelines, you're like just north of Salt Lake City, you can look up on the sides of the Wasatch Mountains, and you can see several shorelines up there that are fossil remnant features of the presence of Lake Bonneville that once existed there. Normally, if you've got a static body of water and it's standing, you know that if you've got a lake or anything that you fill up, a tub, anything, any container, you know that the surface of that water is going to be level and create a level line around the rim, right?
Yep, that's right.
It's going to be level, right? Unless there's some disturbing force. Now, what geologists actually early noticed on was that the shorelines from Lake Bonneville were not level. And the reason they weren't level is because when the lake drained away, it was a combination of draining away through catastrophic flooding and then the remnant water evaporated away. But what happened was the weight of that water, 1,000 feet of water, had literally depressed the surface of the ground there by several hundred feet. So when that was gone, that came back. And when that came back, what it did is it raised up in the middle. You can kind of picture in the middle of the lake where the water was the deepest, that shoreline now, that fossil shoreline, was higher than it was at its two ends. Does that make sense? Because if the land had stayed where it was, there would be an even rim of shoreline around the high water mark of the lake. But because the land didn't remain stable, it rose, and where the water was the deepest, the land rose the most, see? So now the shorelines are tilted, and that was a clue, see?
So you mean,
and that's isostatic.
So you're saying
that's isostatic rebound.
The weight of the water itself is what?
It's the weight of the water itself. Now, if 1,000 feet of water can cause hundreds of feet of depression, imagine what 10,000 feet of ice could do.
Yeah.
So if, in fact, I have photographs in my slideshows here, and maybe I'll show some of those there in Colorado during one of the lectures, but where you can see, they're aerial photographs where you can see so it's almost like a staircase of shorelines around Hudson Bay. The Hudson Bay up in Ontario was where the glacial ice was the thickest, so that was the lowest spot. And so it makes sense that area right there now is filled by seawater because it's a naturally low depression. And it is actually still rebounding. It's still coming back, although most of the rebound took place in the first few millennia after the ice was removed. But you see, so you've got this vertical movement of the Earth's surface. Now, when you picture when that land is coming back or when that land is being depressed, what's going on below the surface? See, enormous patterns of stress are being generated in the lithosphere, in the rock masses below, right? And in some cases, there are fault lines, there are fissures, there are places where there's magma moving through the rocks, right? So it's almost like, imagine it's almost like a deep pressure massage or something, that's happening when this weight builds up on the land and then when it transfers back into the ocean basin. So we know that there was enormous volcanic eruptions during the deglacial process because the massive flooding from the meltwater of the ice sheets that backflooded into the still water basins and was preserved as layers. In those layers, there are thick deposits of volcanic ash. So you can look at those and you can interpret that and understand that, you had these amazing, huge floods sweeping over the land, and wherever they backflooded into a normal, say a tributary stream or something, and then flowed back out, they left layers of mud. And there are places where you can see 30, 40, 50 layers that are built up called rhythmites. And each one of these was like a pulse of sediment-laden meltwater that gushed in, slowed down, reversed course, and then flowed back out, and in the process left this layer. So you can go and you can find exposures of these layers, and in those layers, sandwiched between them, you can find thick layers of volcanic ash. Wow. So right there, that tells you almost like it's a double catastrophe going on. There's massive flooding at the same time. There's massive volcanic eruptions. So no wonder, the megafauna went extinct.
Yeah,
right.
So I remember reading about this. We have this extinct volcano nearby. It's near Austin, which is about 2 hours from where we live in Texas. And when we were looking into that, we went on a little field trip, Snake Bros field trip, to go check it out. I was reading about the way these volcanoes erupt, and it was talking about the viscosity of the magma and how when it's under a lot of pressure, there are all these gases that are, of course, like dissolved into it. But when it, say, reaches an upper chamber and the pressure becomes less on the magma, these gases start to precipitate into the magma, and that's what causes these explosions. So I can imagine when the isostatic rebound is happening, it's releasing all this weight off the magma and allowing these gases to come out and probably cause
Oh, yeah.
all kinds of explosions and stuff.
explosive volcanism. Yeah, that's exactly right. So that's, what I'm looking into to try to understand. But the scenario now, of course, and it's purely hypothetical because nobody knows yet, because this is cutting edge information. The realization that, that there are cosmic deposits that are found at these same time zones as when the flooding is going on, when the mass extinction is going on, when the volcanism. What has to happen is a detailed chronology needs to be worked out to try to figure out exactly what happened. But here's what makes sense to me, and it's sort of consistent with, I think, most of the evidence, is that whatever brought on the Ice Age, which is still a whole other question itself, it led to this massive accumulation of ice. That's not explained. Then how you get rid of that massive accumulation of ice in a few thousand years is not even close to been explained. In the old days, you had the comfortable assumption that it might have taken 30 or 40 or 50,000 years or longer for the ice to gradually melt away. But then when radiocarbon dating comes along in the 50s, and after you've accumulated a couple of decades worth of data, what became apparent was that no, the melting was way quicker than anybody had imagined. And what happens is that the window during which the ice is at its what they call the late glacial maximum, which is say between 15 and 20,000 years ago, and the time when the ice is gone, has shrunk from 30,000 to 20,000 to 10,000. And then to 8,000, 8,000 years, then to like 5,000. But then the problem is that within that 5,000 or 6,000 years, it's not a uniform melting. The melting is occurring in these massive pulses. You see, massive pulses of meltwater are being discharged back into the ocean. It's not a continuum. It's not a smooth process. You understand what I'm getting at here? It's not, the ocean rose in discrete jumps, and that rising of the ocean in these discrete jumps is because of the fact that the melting was occurring in these discrete pulses. There's what it appears to me now is that there were likely 3 massive pulses of meltwater into the ocean. And it was the third one at 11,600 years ago that was finally the death knell. The first 2 did not end the Ice Age per se. And in fact, the second one, which would have been about at the Younger Dryas, about 12,800 to 12,900 years ago, appears to have actually pushed the planet back into the full depths of cold that existed during the late glacial maximum. So then you had 1,300 years between, say, in round numbers, 12,900 to 11,600 years ago. Then at 11,600 years ago, you had another massive meltwater pulse into the ocean. The oceans rose very rapidly over a short period of time. And at that point, the whole climate of the planet shifted gears, and we moved into the interglacial age. It almost like kickstarting a bike or something. It took 1, 2, and then finally on the third one it took, and the planet was jolted out of the depths of the Ice Age. All the ice melted away that was mantling northwestern Europe, that was covering Canada. Like I said, now bear in mind, because of the fact that sea levels were 400 feet lower, the ice mass was all the way out to the existing coastline at that time, which is not where it is now. See?
Right.
But then when you get south of where the ice sheets were, obviously in Texas was not under the ice sheet.
Right.
Nebraska was earlier, much earlier Ice Age actually did come down to Nebraska, and that is referred to traditionally as the Nebraskan period. It was the Kansan, Nebraskan, the Wisconsin was the last one, the most recent. And it's because it's named after where the deposits of these glaciers were most studied in depth. Right. So in the Kansan, obviously, they were looking in Kansas, and in Nebraska, they were looking in Nebraska, and Wisconsin, they were studying deposits in Wisconsin. Now, the last Ice Age was not the biggest mass of ice. Earlier cycles of glacial ages actually were even larger than the mass of ice that was at the end of the Wisconsin. And see, in the older models, the assumption was is that the Wisconsin lasted about 100,000 or 150,000 years. That means it would have begun, somewhere between 120 and 150,000 years ago, that the ice mass slowly grew, that it was stable for tens of thousands of years, and then, somewhere between 25 and 50,000 years ago, it began to melt away, and then finally, by 7,000 or 8,000 years ago, it was gone. But that model isn't even close to what is now known about the whole process, you see. So what it has done is it just has presented us with a profoundly complex mystery about what happened. I mean, because one of the big mysteries, it was first identified in the early 70s. Once it had accumulated enough radiocarbon dates, a couple of things. One was that, wait a second, we've found pollen and organic material in Canada in areas where the ice was a mile thick 15,000, 20,000 years ago. But this pollen and these seeds and this organic material is dating to 35 to 40,000 years ago. So there's a problem. Right there, you see what the problem is.
Yeah,
right?
I see the problem.
That suggests, a major problem. Wait a second. So these glaciers were gone or mostly gone at that point, at that time. So wait a second. What happens to the model of a long, continued period of ice accumulation and dissipation that lasts 100,000 or 150,000 years? Because suddenly now, right in the middle of that thing, it wasn't there. The ice was not there. So that's one of the problems. The other problem was realizing that the ice had disappeared as quickly as it did, raised the question of, well, in order to melt ice, you have to have energy. Now, where is that energy coming from?
Right.
And that question has not been answered yet.
But you've been following the work of Firestone and West and these guys with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, right? And I know you've been following it very closely.
I'm not only following it, I predicted it probably 15 years before they published their first paper.
No, right.
Because I had concluded that because, see, this thing with it was called by scientists in the early 70s, it was called the energy paradox. And I think I first probably came upon my interest in ice ages goes back basically to, I would say my obsession with understanding that goes back to the 70s. And at that point is when I found, not when it was first published, but maybe 3 to 5 years after there was first published, these studies on the energy requirements. And let me pull something up here for a second. It was one of the key scientists, John T. Andrews. He was with the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and he was one of the first guys that really got into this, trying to understand the deglaciation process. And this is what he found. He looked at he used the period from 12,000 years ago to 7,000 years ago. This was in the early 70s. Now, they've recalibrated the radiocarbon dates, so these dates are actually a little too young. Where he's saying 12,000 to 7,000 now would be, say, probably maybe 8,000 to 13 or 9,000 to 14,000 years ago. But it's a 5,000-year window, right?
Right.
So this is what he says is the average. Now, this was published in 1973 in Arctic and Alpine Research, which was a specialist journal for glaciologists primarily. Were the ones who published in it when glaciology was really becoming an established science. He says the average marginal recession between 12,000 and 7,000 BP, which you'll see a lot in the scientific literature, which just means before present.
Right.
Okay, 12,000 and 7,000 BP is estimated at 260 meters per year and varies little between the northwest and southern margins. Now, 260 meters per year, that's times 3.28, so that's, it's over 850 feet a year of recession. So now imagine, let's see, here's now you can visualize the problem. You're standing let's say you're standing up in central Minnesota, actually right about where I grew up, as a matter of fact. You would be standing right at the southern edge of this huge ice sheet that extended for 1,500 or 2,000 miles or so to the north, And it would have been a huge, vast, probably where you were standing at the ice margin, it would have been a wall of ice 500 to 800 feet in thickness. As you typically see the big glaciers when they're coming and calving into the ocean, even in modern times. But it would stretch back. I mean, it was as far as the eye could see, and it would just extend, from, say, central Minnesota all the way up to the Arctic Circle.
Right.
Right. So you're standing there and you're looking at this thing, right? Now, to get rid of that, this is one model. This is not saying this is exactly what happened, but hypothetically it would be the same as this, right? That it would go 850 feet every year. It's melting back 850 feet. Next year, 850. So if you're standing at the edge of the thing, and assuming you're not going to get swept away by meltwater floods coming off, right? If you have some way of not drowning, right?
Right.
You're standing there this year. Next year, it's going to be 850 feet further north. The next year after that, it's going to be 1,700 feet. And each year, for the next 5,000 years, it's receding back 850 feet. On average each year in order to be gone that quickly. Does that make sense what I just was? Okay, yeah. So now imagine what we've learned today from the times of the ending of the Little Ice Age, which was roughly 200 years ago, 150 to 200 years ago. I think you could say the last phase of the Little Ice Age ended in about 1850, right? Now, during the Little Ice Age, which was actually 3 periods of unusual cold weather that went from the 1300s to the 1800s, right? Now, during that period of time, glaciers worldwide got bigger than they had been in 10,000 years, right?
Whoa.
After the big glaciers melted, the climate of the planet went into the hypsothermal or climatic optimum, which was actually warmer, considerably warmer than the world is today. The glaciers shrank back to a great deal. They shrank back. So the great ice sheets over Canada were gone, right? But now the mountain glaciers in Canada, in Alaska, in Europe, in Russia, they all, even like down in New Zealand where they have mountain glaciers on the South Island, all these glaciers began to grow, and they grew to their largest extent since the Great Ice Age ended, right? So what we have here is like this little window into, by the fact that our science and technology and industry came along at the end of the Little Ice Age, it has afforded us this opportunity to see a miniature version of glacier recession. You see, because the glaciers began to recede in the early to mid 1800s, and they've been doing that continuously and until now. They're still doing that. See, that's the thing that people don't understand. They think, oh, they've only been receding in the last 20 or 30 years or whatever. No, they've been receding for 150 to 200 years. See, and they're receding from the biggest they've been in 10,000 years.
Right.
Right. So people just don't understand this. But now let's get back to the recession or the disappearance of the huge ice mass at the Lake Wisconsin. Now, when we saw the glaciers receding during the Little Ice Age, there was nothing like, even then, there was nothing like 850 feet per year, year after year after year after year, right?
Right.
It hasn't even been remotely like that. But see, so that in itself, it's like, where does the energy come from to drive that much melting? Well, so they did some calculations, and like, so here's what he goes on to say in this paper. He says this paper is mainly concerned with the rates of marginal recession of the Laurentide ice sheet, right? Which was the name of the big ice sheet over eastern Canada.
Right.
There was a separate ice sheet over the Canadian Rockies, the Cordilleran. But he says the marginal recession of the Laurentide ice sheet, with particular emphasis on the retreat rates experienced during the deglaciation of the northern United States and southern Canada and the Canadian Arctic. Of primary concern is the energy balance at the margin of the ice sheet required to promote the rapid Lake Wisconsin retreat. So that was it. That was the primary concern, and it was the primary concern of this conference that was taking place back in 1973, where they're going, wait a second, if the ice was gone this quickly, how in the world, where was the energy that melted that ice? You see, because right and see, even in Canada today, there's no ice sheet. There's a lot of snow, but come spring, that snow melts away. It doesn't endure. It doesn't just stay there underground and not melt. And then next year, another 4, 5, 6 feet of snow is dumped, and then the next year, see, that's the problem of coming on an ice age. You see, it's
right.
Like you have to switch gears. You have to. It's like a switch is thrown, and then all of a sudden now, hey, spring. It's winter, but spring doesn't come for 10 or 20,000 years. Yeah. You see, by the end of that, now you've got a mile or 2 miles of ice. Now, reverse it, flip the switch again, and you got to get rid of that ice. But you got to get rid of it literally in a few thousand years. So in the early 70s, this was the thing that they were beginning to confront. And he goes on to say, right here, and this hasn't changed since then. The growth and development of the Laurentide ice sheet complex is still an enigma. Unexplained is the growth of the ice cap in its gathering grounds of Baffin Island, Labrador, and Keewatin, where at least today there are low winter accumulation regimes. Equally unexplained is the southward penetration of the ice sheet to latitude 40 degrees north or so, where, even under full glacial climatic conditions, mass loss at the southern margin must have been considerable. So, see, here's the thing. It's like this huge conveyor, and it's moving this ice out of Canada in every direction. If you look at Hudson Bay, you'll see Baffin Island, Labrador, and Keewatin kind of form a rim around Hudson Bay. And this is where the ice was accumulating, almost like, the blob or something, and it just kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and it kept getting fed by precipitation in the form of snowfall. And here's the other enigma, see? Here's the problem. In order to have that kind of rapid accumulation of ice, year after year after year, until the pile is 1.5 miles thick, well, you've got to be evaporating water out of the ocean, see? Well, in order to evaporate that water out of the ocean, you got to have heat.
Right.
You see? So how is it? See, it's like one conundrum after another that we're confronted with here. See, how do you wait a minute? If you've got all this extra heat to evaporate all of this water, then how is it that it covers millions of square miles but doesn't melt away?
Right.
See, nothing here makes sense.
Didn't you
wait a minute?
Does it not make sense in terms of like what the standard model, these modern scientists are trying to tell us, or because it seems to me to kind of make sense when you consider that there are these cosmic forces, and it's not this uniformitarian one drop of water, one grain of sand at a time thing. Like there are bigger actors at play here, namely the sun, when it comes to warming things up.
Right.
Well, see, this is the thing. You guys you're going in the right direction. I mean, because we can study this thing and we can wrestle with it for decades and years like they have without coming to any solution. As long as we're confined to these like limited terrestrial sources of energy. But as soon as we're willing to expand our thinking into the cosmic domain, the whole scenario changes, you see.
Exactly.
Because, yes, now we have the possibility of solar activity on a scale that we maybe have not experienced in modern times. We have the possibility of impacts from things from space, which this is to me one of the most important realms of scientific inquiry going on now, is the danger that this planet is constantly in from the flux of material in space, right? But it hardly ever gets talked about. Every few months there'll be a close flyby, and it's almost become routine now. Some half-mile object is just outside the orbit of the moon and flies by. Oh, well, another close call. Well, to me, right now, we've really had the whole discussion of climate change and global change and so on has been hijacked. I'll just come right out and say it. It has been hijacked.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And actually, it could turn out that that's not such a good thing, because there are other things going on. And to assume that, that humankind is now in the driver's seat and that's the full explanation of climate change. No, that is a conceit, and I think it's going to end up to be the ultimate hubris if we don't realize. Wait a second, no, we are still minimal nothings when it comes to the forces of nature, and to imagine that now we're the dominant force driving global change? No.
Right.
People who believe that have no concept of the history of this planet upon which we live.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I just saw, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, a story, and I can't remember who did. I reported it on the podcast, but it was these scientists were studying the little ice age that you were just talking about, and they actually found out they got this old data from like the 17 or 1800s or somewhere, that these older scientists were dropping thermometers way down into the deep oceans in the Pacific and measuring the temperature and everything. So they got all this really old temperature data from the deep ocean Pacific, and then they calibrated it, and then they compared it to today, and they found out that the deep Pacific Ocean is still getting colder from the little ice age.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was...
Yeah, yes, it is, right. So there are lag periods, see, and now we've been in a period for the last 3 years of very low solar activity.
Right.
And it's clear from the evidence that, yes, that the coolings and warmings of the Earth are tracking the sun. And tracking the sun way more than they are carbon dioxide. In fact, it's carbon dioxide that's tracking temperature changes on the Earth and not the other way around. Because when the Earth heats, like, I'll put it this way, if the sun warms the Earth, the oceans absorb that warmth. It decreases the solubility of carbon dioxide that's in the oceans, and the oceans begin to outgas. When the planet cools and the ocean cools, it starts sucking in the carbon dioxide. So the oceans are exhaling and inhaling carbon dioxide in tandem, in tempo with the changes in solar output. Does that make sense?
It does.
And so what we've done through our burning of fossil fuels has added to the natural carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere because of ocean exhaling, because of post-Little Ice Age warming. But the problem is we're starting at such a low, in the history of this planet, almost the entire history of this planet, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been 3, 4, 5, 10 times greater than it is now. And what we see is that during these periods, like during the late Wisconsin, okay, for example, if the ice core records are accurate, there was a point at which carbon dioxide got down to 200 parts per million or lower. And you know what happens if carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere get lower than 200 parts per million? What do you think happens?
Plants die.
What is the main role of... Yes, plants begin to die.
Yes.
And in fact, for anybody who studies carbon dioxide and realizes, for the same reason that professional greenhouse growers will pump up carbon dioxide to 1,000, 1,200 parts per million, because plants are more robust, they're healthier, they grow faster, and so on. And virtually all commercial greenhouses will enrich the interior atmosphere of the greenhouse with carbon dioxide. Why do they do that? Well, what they're actually doing is they're pumping up the greenhouse concentrations inside the greenhouse to typically what they have been through most of Earth history until the cycle of ice ages began. And then the percentages of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere dropped from typically, 500 to 1,000 or 1,200 parts per million down to 200 parts per million, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, you see, there's some studies now that would suggest that maybe this is one reason that we didn't see the birth of agriculture until 8,000 or 9,000 years ago, was because carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere were too low to grow food crops. See, I mean,
That's crazy. Okay, so I do have a question on that end, and it has to do with the Pleistocene fauna, the megafauna. I've always wondered about what kind of biomass was required to support such enormous populations of such enormous animals.
Yes, well, they were, here's the other interesting thing, too, and here's more conundrums. There was a huge concentration of megafauna in Siberia.
Yeah.
While North America was under the ice sheet, right? So how does that make sense?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense at all. How is Siberia like temperate or whatever when
Yeah, I mean right. See. But
what do you think? I mean,
is this.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was going to say. What do you think the answer is? Is there one? Do you have a possibility?
I only have a hypothesis that needs to be tested.
Right.
But that would be simply going back to the conversation we had earlier about isostasy.
Oh.
Because the Earth is spinning on its axis, right? And it's not 100% rigid. It's a more or less plastic medium when looked at homogeneously. With spinning on its axis, what it does is the mass migrates towards the equator, right? So the equatorial diameter of the Earth is about 7,926 miles. The polar diameter is about 7,900 miles. So there's a 26-mile difference between polar diameter and equatorial diameter, or about a 13-mile difference in radius. So if you were at the center of the Earth and you were going to have to dig your way to the surface, you'd get there, you'd have 13 miles less of digging to do if you dug along the polar axis rather than at the equator. So now, picture this. Land mass is distributed in latitude according to several factors. One is its distance from the Earth's center of mass. You see? Now, if the Earth is spinning, and all of a sudden you pile, in a geological sense, all of a sudden you pile up, trillions and trillions of tons of ice on one part of the Earth. Does that affect the rotation? And the answer is, I absolutely think it has to. It has to affect the rotation.
Yeah, basic physics implies that it should. Yes.
Yes, but the question is how much?
Right. Exactly.
Right. And I have not found any studies yet that would suggest they've really looked at that. How the presence of a huge mass of ice that might be up to 1.5 miles, 2 miles thick would affect rotation. Well, likewise, when you melt that ice and remove it, and it goes back into the ocean basins, it has to affect the rotation. Now, what the planet is trying to do, by the fact that it's bulging around the equator, is it's always trying to maintain equilibrium. And so just like any system, if something causes disequilibrium, and then the force that caused the disequilibrium is removed, the system will attempt to restore the original equilibrium.
Right.
Now, picture that if you're removing the lid of ice, and now the land surface, the rock, the lithosphere below it begins to rebound 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, right? What happens? Is there possibly a lateral motion that has to take place to compensate for that increasing or decreasing distance from the center of mass? Because what the planet is trying to do is to homogeneously and uniformly distribute its mass about its center of gravity, see? So if something disturbs that, then the planet will have to try to eventually readjust. So when you remove the ocean, when you remove the ice from the land comes back. It goes into the ocean basin. Now, what do you think is going to happen to the floor of the ocean basin when you put these trillions of tons of weight back in?
They're going to sink.
They're going to sink. That's exactly right. And in fact, the empirical data has been gathered since the 1940s that suggests that there has been enormous isostatic compensation particularly along the suture zones, like, for example, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which shows evidence of considerable vertical displacement since the end of the last ice age. So now, what I'm getting at is when all of this surface redistribution takes place, now you've got portions of the surface of the Earth that are not in an equilibrium position with respect to the Earth's center of gravity. So now the natural tendency would be for them to try to migrate to where they should be. So, for example, if you're looking at the area around Hudson Bay and it's suddenly no longer the equilibrium distance from the Earth's center of mass, what's it going to try to do? So if you start moving it 2,000 feet or a half a mile away from where it had been in quasi-equilibrium, now what it's going to try to do in order to redistribute the mass uniformly is it's going to try to migrate towards the equator. Does that make sense? Because, look, if it rises a half a mile, now it's no longer in the position that it needed to be a half a mile. Because, picture, you're going 90 degrees from the equator and you're up to the pole, and in that arc, you've moved 13 miles closer to the center of the Earth, right? So if you change the distance of a particular rock mass, and now suddenly it's 2,000 feet higher than it should be, or 2,000 feet lower. See, that then could set up lateral stresses that move latitudinally or longitudinally in order to try to. So, picture, interestingly, and this is what Charles Hapgood was noticing way back in the 1950s, that if you took the known distribution of the great ice mass, which was pretty much centered on Hudson Bay, and you drew a circle around it, that circle would be almost the same size as the Arctic Circle, you see? No. So he theorized that, well, Hudson Bay was the North Pole. And the ice around the North Pole, which was greater than the ice mass that is now in the South Pole, pretty much reached to just beyond what would have then been the Arctic Circle, and that's where it stopped. And if you move the crust of the Earth so that Hudson Bay moves up to the North Pole, you make that shift along that great circle arc, then it means that Siberia has moved in the other direction and has actually moved south.
Right. So
what he was theorizing was a short-lived period of accelerated plate tectonics. And he introduced this idea at a time when plate tectonics, or lateral motion of the Earth's plates, was only just beginning to be accepted.
Yeah. And
he was generally consigned to the fringe. But he didn't really have a mechanism for driving those lateral motions. And to me, it would make sense that this inconceivably massive redistribution of surface weight could be a force that could drive those kinds of adjustments. So in other words, as Hudson Bay began to move away from the center of the Earth's mass, it migrated southward to try to reach equilibrium, because now suddenly it's 2,000 feet farther away than it had been, right? Well, the pole is not the place for that, because you want no more than 7,900 miles at the pole. So if you actually go, 10 degrees or 15 degrees south, you're going to find a place where a mass of rock that is that far from the Earth's center should actually be. See, I know it sounds kind of convoluted and complex what I'm trying to explain, but I think you get the general idea, right?
Yeah, I think what you're saying basically is that when you lift that weight off all of that rock, and it then rebounds and then is thus farther away from the center of Earth's center, then it wants to drift and get in the right spot on the surface where that weight is equalized, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And we,
holy smokes.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot we're just on the verge of figuring out. That's why I really get irritated when I hear somebody saying it. All the science is settled.
Right.
Yeah.
Science is never settled.
No, it ain't. No, it's never settled. It is never settled. And consensus is meaningless in science. Because the job of, yes, it appears that we have a consensus. Once you get to that point, then it should be the primary job should be, well, let's try to rip this consensus apart and see if, when the dust clears, if it's still a consensus, right?
Yes.
That hadn't been done. It was declared a consensus, and the research was declared over. Essentially, the conclusion preceded the research. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, we're big proponents.
And that's
we're big proponents here of the idea of falsification rather than looking for proof.
Yeah, and consensus is for courtrooms,
that's exactly
juries.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. All right, Randall, we've hit up on an hour here. Let us take a short break, and we want to try to get the watcher in on this call so that he can listen in. Is that all right?
Yeah. How long is that? Yeah, I'll get up and go have a snack or something.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast with Randall Carlson, and we are having all kinds of technical difficulties and handling all of them flawlessly. Zero mistakes. All right, Randall, let's yeah.
Yes.
Well, I want to apologize to you guys for the technical difficulties because it's what happens when I start thinking too hard and I get too excited. So I'm gonna try to rein it in here on my end and
yeah, try
to calm down a little bit.
Your brain's blowing all the computer electronics around us, man. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was because I think that you're just fantastic at doing this is like let's say that from the perspective of the like say the Clovis people or any of the humans that were around when this Younger Dryas thing kicked off, when these cataclysms kicked off, what would they see? What are the things that would be happening? What would it look like to a person then and somebody trying to survive? What is that like?
Well, it depends, really on if you're in the right place at the right time, because you see the problem with the impact phenomena is typically if it's anything much more than, say, the Tunguska event of 1908, there wouldn't be any witnesses in the aftermath. Anybody who was able to see the thing would be dead afterwards. From any number of things, from the overpressure, from the heat, secondary consequences. But obviously, people did survive because otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Right.
So that's pretty convincing evidence that somebody survived. So
it can be done.
All right, so maybe I should phrase it this way: what would it look like for people who maybe may not have survived? I'm just saying, like, what would it be like on the ground? Is what I'm asking, I guess.
Yeah, it would have been a really scary place. I would actually rather be in a space. I'd like to be up on the International Space Station while it was going on.
Absolutely.
So, well, I mean, God, where would I even a question like that you could actually answer by writing a whole book about.
Lay it on us.
Because listen, there was no place on Earth that came through unscathed.
Right.
But the problem is that there was a whole range there were definitely places of refuge because, in ecology, whenever there is a major habitat destruction that takes place, right? Now, this could be attributed to a forest fire. It could be attributed to a volcanic eruption. It could be attributed to a tsunami that, wipes out an entire coastal ecosystem. There's always places that, for whatever just the fluke of in this complex, chaotic situation, manages to survive. Right? It's the term in ecology is a refugium. So like in the aftermath of Mount St. Helens, you saw that there were places where, you had this completely obliterated landscape, literally like as desolate as the moon, for 200 square miles in the aftermath of that May eruption of Mount St. Helens back in 1980, right? Well, as it is now, nature is quite rapidly reclaiming that devastated landscape. But what you'll see is there'll be like pockets, pockets of life, pockets of green. And then it radiates out from there. Particularly colonizer species go out that are usually some species of fern. And then the ferns exist for a number of seasons, and by their death and recycling into the volcanic ash, it creates the conditions for the next generation of plant life. And then it proceeds through that until you get to a climax state, which is usually, depending on where on the earth it is, it could be old growth forests or whatever. Now, one of the things is that, there are a number of questions about, for example, the Carolina Bays in southeastern United States, which are these huge elliptical depressions in the land surface that have long axes that are generally parallel. And there's a lot of controversy over what formed these things. There's thousands of them, by the way, along the coastal plains. If you read Graham Hancock's book, in Magicians of the Gods, I'm pretty sure he talks about it in there. I know he's got it in his new book, America Before. There are some scientists, and I've met these scientists and talked to them, that believe it's, a longer process that has taken place, and they have their arguments for why they think so, that it has nothing to do with any kind of impact or anything like that. And there are others who think that they are related to impacts or impact craters of some type. This has been the Carolina Bays. You can look them up online. You'll see these remarkable images of these elliptical depressions along in South Carolina and North Carolina. They're typically very swampy because of their fact that they're kind of depressed around. They become places where water forms and peat forms, where water accumulates and peat forms. Okay. They also have very interesting flora and fauna in them that is unique. Like, for example, Venus flytraps, which are the predatory plants.
Oh, yeah.
Right. They grow in fact, that's where they're found, is in these Carolina Bays. Now, I tend towards the idea that Carolina Bays were probably extraterrestrial in origin, because I look at my studies of the Tunguska event showed that one of the things that they showed was that there were elliptical depressions under the epicenter of that atmospheric explosion. And I would lean towards the model that each one of these, what we're basically seeing there is, like, shall I say, a swarm of thousands of Tunguska objects coming into the atmosphere, and essentially blowing up in the atmosphere, and a conical shock wave intersects the sandy coastal plains and is able to essentially, it's almost like a blowout hole. The pressure pushes the sand because it's all on the coastal plain.
Right.
But again, it's very controversial. But if that scenario is true, then, that would have been pretty much the end of anything that lived in the southeastern United States.
Yeah.
In fact, I know they've found Carolina Bay formations in Nebraska whose orientation is different than the orientation. This is something that's easier to show pictures. I'm going to have a lot of graphics showing these Carolina Bays and how the orientation changes. You move from, say, actually there are some of the northernmost ones are up in Virginia, and then you come through North Carolina, then South Carolina, and then into Georgia, and always they're along the coastal plain, which is the area between the coast of the Atlantic Ocean and the Piedmont. So what you got is thousands of these things, but the angle of the long axis of the ellipse is slowly shifting, so that when you get into South Georgia, they're almost pointing north-south. Whereas if you're up in North Carolina, they're almost pointing northwest, southeast, see?
Right.
Then if you look at the ones in Nebraska, their axis is aligned northeast southwest. So when you take these long axes and you extend them, they all generally reach a point, kind of a point of convergence over northern Michigan or somewhere up in that area, which suggests potentially what? I don't know. Now, there's one theory. Tony Zamora believes that there was an impact there, a major impact, and the Carolina Bays were thousands of ice boulders that were thrown out from that impact that rained back down.
That's an amazing mental picture right there.
Yeah, and it's terrifying.
Yeah. Now, other scientists like Malcolm LeCompte, who I know, who we got on the Rogan show with us as our consultant when we did the debate with Michael Shermer, he doesn't believe that. I'm not sure what he believes, but he doesn't. And in fact, he may believe that they're cosmically have a cosmic origin, but I don't think he does, because Chris Moore, who's another scientist who's a geologist that's been working on this, he's one of the ones who actually believes that there was a Younger Dryas impact, for sure. And so does Malcolm LeCompte. They just don't think that the Carolina Bays were part of it. Now, Tony Zamora and several others do. And, it's just going to have to be debated out. And I don't see any resolution to it anytime soon, because unless we have some conceptual or evidentiary breakthrough, I don't see the controversy getting resolved. Although my idea is not originated with me, because this controversy literally goes back to the 1930s when aerial photographs of these things were first taken, and geologists who looked at it came to believe that it was caused by like a giant meteor shower, because that's the only way they could think of to explain it, and to explain the ellipses, to explain the orientation of the long axes. I was just really obsessively interested in the bays really back in, when would that have been? I took an aerial flight. I hired a pilot to fly me over the Carolina Bays, and that had to have been 20 years ago, maybe longer. So yeah, my interest in them goes back certainly into the early 1980s. So at one point, when I was researching the bays, and because I live in Georgia, I had ready access to them. So there's a whole flock of the Carolina Bays in South Georgia that I went and visited on foot, and did this one aerial overflight. And I have photographs of that. But at that point, I'm still inclined to the original idea, which was that seemed to make the most sense to me, was that it would be a fragmenting comet nucleus that spawned thousands of Tunguska-sized objects that then entered the atmosphere and exploded, and the shock waves of their explosions, which actually would form as they're entering the atmosphere, the air is going to pile up in front of them and form a conical shock wave. This is basic physics that's pretty well known by meteor scientists, right? So if that thing is coming in and there's a conical shock front and the atmosphere is piling up in front of it, and then it explodes, right? And you can almost imagine like I guess what would you like? Super compressed air or something, hitting the ground and gouging out these depressions, which to me still seems to be, and only because it theoretically you can kind of make it work, but also empirically, elliptical depressions were found under the Tunguska epicenter.
Right.
So, but it's, again, I'm not going to say, oh, that's it, I've got it all figured out, because I don't. But that would be, I just don't know about Zamora's idea. I don't know. I haven't thought it through. I haven't tried to understand the physics of it, whether ice blocks could survive passage through the atmosphere. He did then ran the numbers and thought that they could. I want to see, I have not looked at Malcolm LeCompte's refutation of the ice boulder hypothesis. So I can't put any stock in it, because I'm not familiar with what his objections are. I do know he objected to it, and his objection, when Graham did an interview with, I think he did an interview with Zamora, or he did something and kind of caused a bit of a rift because of the ones that think that the Carolina Bays have a terrestrial origin. And then you have it's actually the same controversy that goes back to the 30s through the 40s and 50s when there were two camps that arose. One were referred to as the terrestrials and the other were the celestials, right?
Yeah.
So the celestials had variants on the idea that it was a meteor shower or a comet impact, an exploding comet, something like that. The terrestrials were centered around Douglas Johnson, who was the dean of geomorphology out of, where was he? I think he was out of Harvard. And he made a whole study of the Carolina Bays, wrote a book called a big tome, which I actually did read the entire book cover to cover back in the 80s, called The Origin of the Carolina Bays. And what he came up with was what he called the complex theory. So in order to explain all of the vagaries and inconsistencies and weird things associated with the bays, he called it the complex theory. So he basically threw everything into the theory to come up with he called it the solution. Artesian solution Aeolian lacustrine hypothesis.
Oh my gosh.
Did you get that? Repeat that back to me.
Latusian, Latusia, terrestrial, something.
No, not. We'll save that for a different hypothesis, the Latesian hypothesis.
Classic battle between aliens and terrestrials.
That's right.
Yeah, it was. I'll repeat it just for the sake of just being able to repeat it is an impressive thing, right? And like I always say, sometimes I even impress myself.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is, I'm not easily impressed.
When you are impressed, it's isostatic impression.
That's what it is. I've been looking for that. I've been searching for years for the term to describe it. So thank you for that.
No problem, buddy.
Where was I going with this?
Give us the name of his hypothesis one more time. What is it?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, so the Artesian, solution, lacustrine, Aeolian.
Wow.
Okay,
so what are all...
I can actually explain it where you would kind of get it.
Okay.
You ever heard of an Artesian well?
Yes.
Okay, now an Artesian well is where you have what's called a perched groundwater table where it's being blocked and it has to force its way to the surface under pressure.
Okay.
Right? So picture water trying to force its way to the surface under pressure. Now, what he realized back then was that the tilt of the bedrock in the southeastern coastal plain was towards the southeast, right? Now, on top of this bedrock, you've got a couple of million years of accumulation of coastal sediments, because picture this, the ocean comes in and it goes away. It comes in, it might move 50 miles inland, which it has done, and then it'll drain back out, right? Each time as it does this, as it comes in, it's building shorelines and creating sand from the pounding surf, and then it goes back out, and after a while, you've got this huge accumulation, this thick accumulation, and it's generally unconsolidated. It hasn't lithified into rock yet, you see. So it's generally kind of a softer ground, right? So this is where these Carolina Bay imprints are found, is into this softer, sandy coastal plain. So Artesian, water is moving along the ground, along the bedrock, probably in a fissure or somewhere, and it's under pressure, right? Now picture you've got a slab of rock and it's buried under, say, 100 feet of sandy type stuff, porous material. And now it comes to a break in that rock. It's flowing. The picture, you've got layers of rock. They're tilted, and between two of these layers, you've got this water flowing under pressure. It finds a break in the rock, and what it does is it turns up, right?
Yeah.
It flows to the surface. That's basically what an Artesian well is, right? So now picture this. You've got an upside-down underground waterfall. Now, when water, a river comes and it flows over a precipice, it eats away the precipice, right? It erodes it back. This is what's called a receding cataract, right? So picture now you got this upside down underground waterfall rising to the surface, and the bedrock is limestone, by the way, and it's eating its way back up through that limestone. So it creates this, shall we say, this aperture as it erodes back that would be the equivalent of a canyon, except it's much smaller, of course, but it's eroded this through the limestone bedrock layer. See, as it's migrating uphill. Now, that's the artesian part. The solution part is the part I just described, where it's dissolving the limestone as it's flowing under it, and then it hits that opening. It now diverts and begins flowing upward, and where it makes that bend, that corner, it's dissolving the limestone. So it's dissolving the limestone along an axis, and then it begins to erode its way back up, right? So that's the solution part. Then the lacustrine part is that now that water rises to the surface and it begins to form a lake, right, or a pond. Now that's the lacustrine. That's the word lake, lacustrine, right? Then you get to the aeolian part. Aeolian means wind. So now the wind blows the water, and the wind blows the water in a special way so that the water forms, it erodes the coastline and circulates and shapes this lake into this perfect ellipse. So that's in essence his theory, the Artesian solution lacustrine aeolian.
Wow.
So it starts with this artesian aquifer, it dissolves the limestone, rises to the surface, forms a lake, and then the wind blowing on the lake shapes it into an ellipse.
But okay, that's
the
crazy.
problem is then in the 1960s and 70s, they began taking soundings and core samples and stuff from the bottom of the Carolina Bays, and that aperture that in his theory would have been in other words, you've got this crack, in the bedrock that follows the long axis of the ellipse, if you can picture that.
Right.
So they went down, they began to explore the bedrock and discovered that there was no such thing ever under any of the Carolina Bays they looked at.
That's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, did he just armchair theorize this without going out there to look? Is that the idea? And then they eventually went out there and found out, there aren't any artesian wells underneath these things.
Well, he did field exploration,
okay.
But back then, he didn't have the means, the technological means, ground penetrating radar and all the things that came later, where they were actually able to go and look under in the bedrock and also take coring samples and stuff. So,
okay.
I would say they should have said the same thing to him that they did to J. Harlan Bretz, which is like, where do you get all the wind?
Yeah, right.
You don't have a source for that wind. It didn't happen.
Right. So that's cool. You guys know who Bretz is. I think that's great because, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody knew, just say the name Bretz, who knew who J. Harlan Bretz was, other than about a dozen geologists out in the Northwest.
I learned from Bretz from Graham Hancock's book that you were a part of. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have questions actually about the number one about the Drumlins. I've always wondered this, like those features look like, basically like the description of all that water moving underneath, under pressure underneath the ice across the landscape. What does that look like at the forward tongue of the glacier? Is that water like coming out of there like crazy, like, exploding out from underneath the glacier under pressure? Is that what's happening, or is this?
That's exactly right. It's emerging from the glacier in the form of an outburst flood.
Oh.
That's what and yes, and massive. And I if we had graphics, I could show you some photographs of where some of these outbursts took place. And yeah, it's pretty mind blowing.
Yeah.
Well, clearly the scablands is where the outburst took place. Although, now see, here's the thing. In the case of an impact, which, getting back to that, the Younger Dryas impact, to me is the most plausible explanation for how you could suddenly introduce huge amounts of energy into the system, cause extreme melting. One of the main objections to that theory is that, it's dismissed because they're saying, well, that would be a singular event. And we know that there was melting at 14,000 years ago and at 13,000 and 11,000 years. So no, that couldn't be, because and a very similar argument is made against the megafaunal extinction. Well, we know that the megafauna didn't all go extinct at one time, right? So therefore, it couldn't have been a comet or some type of an impact that decimated the megafauna. But see, I think what they're doing is they're creating a straw man, because we're realizing how complex some of these cosmic interactions can actually be. And it's, yes, certainly, you could have one big dumb rock that comes in and hits the Earth, boom, a singular event. And then there's a lot of chaos and turmoil and everything and problems, and then things settle out, and then it goes back to normal. And certainly that is one possible scenario. But there are other scenarios that are a whole lot more complicated than that. And to get into what those scenarios might be, I kind of turn to these the neo-catastrophists from Britain, primarily centered around William Napier and Victor Klube and several others who have been working on the consequences and the evidence for interactions between Earth and cosmic material since at least the 1970s, right? They wrote a book, you'll like this, a book that I read a long time ago, came out in 1980. It is called The Cosmic Serpent. Which for historical reasons, I would highly recommend getting a copy of it and reading it, because they don't have, some of the things that they get into there have maybe, become a little bit dated, but overall, they were right on the money way back in 1980. They were like some of the first guys that began looking and going, you know what, the Earth may have been pummeled far more frequently and far more recently than anybody has assumed up to this point. And they were definitely in the forefront of that kind of thinking. But in that scenario, you could have a large celestial object, say a comet, that comes into the inner solar system and then begins undergoing a series of fragmentation events. Something along the line, we've now seen enough comets. We've seen 4 or 5 comets whose nuclei have disintegrated under various scenarios. One, probably the most famous, is the Shoemaker-Levy 9, which was discovered in March of '93, and was a comet nucleus that had just made a close passage by Jupiter, and it had gone within the Roche limit of Jupiter, which is within the limit of Jupiter's gravity field, or the gravitational force. The force of Jupiter's gravity field overcomes the internal cohesion of the object, and it disaggregates, right? And that's exactly what happened. It came around, it went through Jupiter's super powerful gravity field and got torn apart. And when David Levy discovered it initially, and then that was followed up by Carolyn and Gene Shoemaker, it was just beginning to come apart. And over the next several weeks, it separated into 21 separate pieces. So what had been one nucleus became 21. It spawned 21 smaller nuclei, right? So they began to spread out in what was called the cosmic string of pearls. And so after 3 months of observations, the astronomers were able to calculate the orbital elements. They had enough information, enough data to calculate the orbital elements, by which they were able to reconstruct the geometry of its orbital ellipse. They also knew that the tempo enough, and the mathematics of orbiting bodies are well enough known that as it's approaching the sun, it's going to accelerate, and then it's going to come out from around the sun, and as it's moving away from the sun, it's going to decelerate. And all of that can be, that's just the mathematics that can be worked out with calculus and regular observations. So they were, after 3 months of observations, they were able to predict that its orbit was going to intersect Jupiter's orbit. At the same time, Jupiter was going to be there, right?
Right.
So at the time this happened, then in July of '94, this was the most watched astronomical event in history of astronomical observations. And what we saw was that the 21 pieces plunged into the Jovian atmosphere and raised these gigantic plumes, some of them which were bigger than the Earth, and they unleashed tremendous amounts of energy. Now, each one of those, had they not plunged into Jupiter, but had, let's say, gone through another round or two or three, each one of those nuclei could have further fragmented into other nuclei, and those into other nuclei, all the way down to cosmic dust and everything in between. You get it?
Yeah.
So now you've got this really complex range of possibilities, right? Earth encountering this stuff. On the one hand, let's say it just encounters dust. Well, in that case, what's going to happen, it's going to increase the opacity of the Earth's atmosphere, and it's going to reflect a lot of sunlight back into space, right? Suppose it intersects a stream of a swarm of this debris, where each one of these fragments might be 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 feet in diameter, but of the packing the power of a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
See, now in the scenario of the British neocatastrophist, there may be essentially storms, cosmic storms, if you will, right? There may be larger objects, and we've observed these larger objects that have an entourage of smaller objects with them. You see, so you may have one or two big impacts and then a whole bunch of smaller impacts. All of these things are plausible scenarios. You see.
Isn't it that like
ahead.
aren't there some strange like strings of like vertically aligned craters that they've found on the moon that may be explained by this exactly thing, like with the comet piece?
Catina, yes,
Yes,
there are, and in fact, there's probable several of those that have been discovered on the Earth. There's a whole string of, I think, 8 crypto explosion structures that reach from Tennessee across Missouri. I think there's 8 of them, and they're in a line, and they appear to all be the same age. They are probably, it was probably that type of an impact that produced those.
Crypto explosion structures. I'm going to have to remember that term. That's awesome.
That's a good one, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So that was what they were originally called when they discovered them and didn't really know what they were. Now, it's been proven, I think, that 4 of them are impact related. I visited, let's see, which ones did I have? Visited 3 or 4 of them. Gosh, way back, when was that? 90s? No, probably the early 2000s, yeah. Jephthah Knob, I visited that one. That was one of the first ones.
Right after the Y2K cataclysm, you went out and did more geology.
I did, yes. Right after the Y2K cataclysm, yeah. While I was out in the wasteland, the aftermath of the Y2K.
Dude, I like the way you describe the comets breaking up. It reminds me of just like, it's like a river, you know, breaking down the rocks into the silt from these huge boulders, just breaking it down, but they're in the river of this cosmic river.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just cool visuals cool. I got there.
Well, I mean, a meteor stream, it's referred to as a stream. And, you know, and I think that the metaphor is appropriate because it is like a stream. And occasionally the Earth, you know, crosses the streams. And so, you know, late October, early November, every fall, Earth crosses the torrid stream as the stream is flowing in towards the sun. And then in late June, early July, it crosses the stream again as the stream is coming away from the sun and going back out towards Jupiter, see, to the Jovian orbit. So, it's a good metaphor. It is like that. Now, here's the thing. If, you know, the torrid stream now is probably an old stream because it's diffuse. A younger stream, like I think the Geminids is pretty young. It takes like 1 to 2 days, I think, to cross the Geminids, whereas it takes over a week to cross the torrid stream, see. So like a young stream is not going to be very diffuse.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's going to the material is going to be more clustered and more concentrated along the orbital pathway. Because during the initial breakup, what you have to picture now, picture this comet nuclei. It's on this big elliptical racetrack, going out to the Jupiter orbit, coming back in, going around the sun. Every time it makes a close by Jupiter, or as it comes around the sun, the gravity and the heat activate it, and it begins to disaggregate. It begins to discharge volatiles. Pieces begin to spall off, right? It may not completely disintegrate, but it always leaves some behind, almost like a snake sloughing off its skin, right? So that is kind of an apt metaphor as well, as far as thinking of a cosmic serpent and a snake, molting its skin and then growing a new skin. When the nuclei object passes the sun, it will molt. It will spall off part of its outer skin. Then that gets spread into that orbital racetrack, right? Now, if it keeps going, what's going to happen is that it's going to eventually completely disintegrate, because cometary nuclei are very loosely aggregated, right? So it doesn't take all that much external force to cause them to come apart. But at some point, depending on when and where throughout this whole process, you might have like clusters. You might have a place where the debris is much more concentrated and dense, and other places in the orbit where it's much thinner, right, and finer. Now, if the Earth's orbit intersects that of the comet, when it's crossing the comet, let's say in a zone where the material is dispersed widely, it'll probably get right on through without anything other than just, a nice light show from a meteor shower. Yeah. But then let's say that it comes across closer to the comet nucleus, where there may be a much greater density of material. Now, there could be obviously a much greater possibility of some kinds of impacts to take place. And so I think that's kind of how we have to begin thinking about this scenario. And what would make sense to me is that the last phase of the Ice Age, which is called the Late Wisconsin, really seemed to begin around 25 or 26,000 years ago. It almost appears as if, there was this interim period. Remember I mentioned that there were like forests growing in Canada 35 to 40,000 years ago?
Yes.
That, were inconsistent with the idea of a long, unbroken Ice Age continuum. But so, so then I kind of lost my train of thought there. Must be getting after 11 where I'm at.
Well, I did want to ask you, because you mentioned at the beginning that there were the idea is coming now to that there were 3 large meltwater pulses. And I've known,
yes,
because of listening to you and studying up on this about meltwater pulse 1A and 1B. And I've always thought of 1A as being the beginning of the Younger Dryas, and then 1B as being at the end of it. But is there one that's earlier, like just a one previous to that?
1A is actually dated at 14.6
okay.
BP.
All right.
And then the Balling-Alarod Younger Dryas boundary is dated at somewhere now between 12.8 and 12.9 thousand years ago. Now, I wasn't sure if there was a meltwater pulse that coincided with that, but yes, there's been some dated evidence that definitely shows there was a huge meltwater pulse into the Arctic Ocean that coincides with the onset of the Younger Dryas. There was also a huge flood through the Lake Superior Basin that seemed to emanate from Lake Nipigon, which was now presently Lake Nipigon, that dates to the onset of the Younger Dryas. Do you guys have access to Google Earth?
We do.
Pull up Google Earth.
Okay.
Open it up, and anybody who is listening to this can do the same thing. And you're going to find Lake Superior.
Okay.
I just opened it on my computer. Are you there?
I'm pulling it up. I'm
getting
getting
it open. He's going to Lake Superior right now.
Okay. So
where
I want you to go.
Were you over there?
I don't know. I was looking at Africa. Be quiet.
Yeah, no. Lake Superior is not in Africa, Russ.
All right, we're there.
Yeah.
Okay. You got Lake Superior.
I do.
Okay, go to the north, and just to the north of Lake Superior, you'll see a big sort of elliptical lake.
Oh, yes.
You see it?
I see it.
That is Lake Nipigon.
Ah.
And I am about willing to bet money that's an impact site right there.
Oh man!
Wow, that was an enormous one. Holy crap!
Oh yeah, that would have been a big one, and it would have been moving fast. Now, this is okay. So now you got the little toolbar at the top.
I got it.
If you click the view in Google Maps, go click on Google Maps then, so you can view the same thing in Google Maps.
Okay.
And
what am I looking for?
Now I'm in Google Maps, and you're going to zoom in on Lake Nipigon. So I'm still loading up. I think I'm just about there.
Oh.
Do you have? Okay, now you should have a little, like on my Google Maps, I've got a little toolbar on the lower right.
Okay.
Plus minus, my north-south arrow, and then a 3D button to tilt the view.
Oh, yeah.
Click that, and now what you're looking at there is you're looking at a depression with a lake, and it's got a raised rim all the way around it except for the southern quadrant that connects it to Lake Superior. Do you know how to go back to 2D and if you go to your upper left and do your drop down menu to terrain, do you know how to get to the terrain or go down to the lower left, and there should be a little box down there to go to the map view.
Okay. I'm trying to do this on my phone, so it's a little different, but I'm pulling it up. Yeah.
Oh, you're on your phone?
Yeah, you can get terrain on maps here.
I can get it.
He's pulling it
Yeah,
up.
I do. I get it on mine all the time. It's just, I guess it takes a little longer. But yeah, then you can get it on your phone. And so anybody listening can go ahead and do this, and so they can see.
Okay, we're on terrain now. We got terrain open.
Okay, you're on terrain. Good. Let me pull up my terrain here. Okay. Coming up. Come on. There we go. All right. So now you can now what I want you to do is look at the southern quadrant, and if you zoom in, you'll see Pine Portage, you'll see Cameron Falls.
Uh-huh.
You see all that?
Yes, sir.
Zoom in and look at that landscape.
Oh, yeah.
Now that is a landscape that was eroded by catastrophic flooding. Extreme.
Massive
you see the Black
chasms and
Sturgeon
stuff.
River?
Yes.
What?
Massive chasms, it looks like, or ravines.
Oh, yeah. Massive chasms. There are massive cataracts. There were receding cataract waterfalls in here. There were coulees.
Cameron Falls.
You see Black Sturgeon. Say that again.
Cameron Falls. What was the river name you were talking about?
Pine Portage.
If you go just to the west of Cameron Falls, you'll see the Black Sturgeon River. There's the Black Sturgeon River Provincial Park.
Okay, yep. I see it.
And you follow that down, and you see that's a massive erosive sluiceway. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that what you've got. Notice that you've got that coulee, that canyon-like feature that then opens out onto the smooth plain. You can see the little Black Sturgeon River coming. Okay, now picture you've got a huge flood coming down through there, and it's carrying huge loads of sediment. In that smooth area in the foreground, southeast of the mouth of that canyon, that's the sediment that was washed out by these floods and left there.
Holy
Are you
crap.
getting the picture? Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you're beginning to see it.
Oh
now, the water then flowed through the floor of Lake Superior. Go down to Isle Royal. Can you see it? Zoom out and you'll see Isle Royal National Park.
I see
the
it.
island.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Zoom in and look at the texture, and you'll see right there, etched into that island, is
striated.
the direction of flow. You can see it. The move from. Can you get it? Can you see it?
Yes. Yes, that's amazing.
Mind blown.
Scoured right into. Yeah. It is amazing. It's totally amazing.
So
And
what's the rock there? I mean, that island, is it sedimentary rock that's all etched like that, or is that?
It's basalt.
That's basalt, and it's just been etched. You can see how the flow has etched. Now, see, it was first it's etched by the glacier, right? the glacier comes over it, but this was not the direction of glacier flow. This was the direction of water flow.
Wow.
See, so then if you come down, follow down where Duluth is, see at the tip, that's like a massive sluiceway there. The water flowed, spilled out over the landscape, flowed down, and flowed into the Mississippi, or into what is now the St. Croix River Valley.
Okay.
And if you go to Taylor's Falls, that was like a Venturi plume. That was an area of constriction where the water was forced through a narrower passage, and it created intense turbulence, and that turbulence formed underwater colking, or underwater tornadoes, if you will, that then burrowed holes into the basalt bedrock up to 20 feet wide and 80 feet deep.
That's insane.
So you can trace the pathway of this flood all the way down into the Mississippi River Valley. And it came out of the Lake Nipigon Basin, and it's dated at 12,900 years ago. So there you go.
Wow.
There you go. So, I mean, on this trip that we're going on, we're going to see some of the Native American culture.
The Chaco Canyon.
The Chaco Canyon culture. So,
well, first let's talk about the trip. Let's name it, right? It's Contact at the Cabin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Go and contact one of the reasons we're talking to Randall right now is because we're going to Contact at the Cabin. It is set up by Grimerica, the Grimerica podcast, and they're doing this Contact at the Cabin in Pagosa Springs. So we are going on that trip. We're going to be there all week with Randall and Grimerica, and there are going to be other guests, and we are going to be going on field trips. And Randall's going to be giving a couple of presentations, and we're going to be rocking out around the bonfire, and it's going to be awesome. And anybody who can go should totally go to this. So now
look it up. Look it up.
Yeah, look it up.
Look it up.
Contact at the Cabin. Look. So now, ask your question. Sorry.
Okay, so I'm thinking about, and I'm fascinated with, Native American artifacts. Like around here in the hill country where we live, there's midden mounds. They're burn rock mounds. Okay. I've crawled on the top of them, picked up little arrowheads. You can see all their work and everything, and it's a huge fascination for me. And I look at the landscape here and see how it's been complete, like this. We're on this plateau that's been completely eroded away, and there's huge canyons and all this stuff. And listening to the things you've said about scale invariance, and I'm on this little river. And there's these massive cliff walls on either side of me.
Miles away from the little bitty river.
Way far, yeah, it's just, so it's looking at all of that. And now looking on Google Earth at what you're talking about. That is on such a much more massive scale. And I imagine this, whatever this cataclysm was that caused the melting of the glaciers, coming down, all of that water and everything coming down through the central United States area and creating the Dust Bowl. That's kind of what my image of it is, and just basically wiping out whatever may have been built there. If the pyramids from Mexico came all the way up into the central United States, we wouldn't know.
Yeah,
right. That's kind of what I think.
Well, here what it appears is that there was a culture here. The culture, and this is what one of the things Graham is getting to in his new book, America Before, is that there is evidence that there was cultural activity going back tens of thousands of years ago. And it seems like part of the story is that there has been regular interruptions. The last major interruption was the Younger Dryas, when the Clovis culture, which hadn't been around very long, but left a very distinct and definite imprint across the whole continent, unglaciated continent, over a period of about 300 to 400 years, they show up suddenly, and then even more suddenly, they disappear. And they just, passed off the stage, and nobody really knows what happens to them. And then it appears to have been about a 600-year to millennium hiatus before new cultural groups move into this vacated territory. Now, what's interesting about that is where we're going to be going, and we'll be going to Mesa Verde, is that something similar on a smaller scale happened. In fact, I refer to it as the Great Abandonment. It was like it was as if all of a sudden this whole culture just got up and left.
Yeah.
Right. And this happened right about the late 1200s or early 1300s, which seems to be interesting because in Europe, it seems to coincide pretty close, excuse me, with the onset of the first phase of the Little Ice Age in Europe. I don't know what the correlation is, but this has been one of the profound mysteries about ancient America is what happened to the Chacoan culture.
Yes.
It was there and then it was not there. And what's interesting, too, is the way they adapted to this landscape, they utilized the geomorphic effects of gigantic floods that had created these overhanging cliffs, you see, and that's where they built their, at least in Mesa Verde, see. But that culture appears to be the same as part of this whole cultural Chacoan culture that was pretty much distributed over 20,000 square kilometers of the San Juan Basin and up into Utah, up into the Durango area. We'll be visiting Chimney Rock, and that is one of the most spectacular and far-reaching of the Chacoan outliers by which they made their whole. Yeah, we'll be getting into that when we'll be doing a presentation on that to show to have a better understanding of how they were trying to link earth and sky, because that was a big part of what their whole cultural orientation was this
above,
linking
so below.
between the terrestrial and celestial, as above, so below, etc.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which, of course, is consistent with all of these archaic cultures from all over the planet,
Right.
Yes.
extending over thousands of years.
Why do you think that is? Is it? I mean, this is so interesting and yet strange to me. But at the same time, I see Kyle and I are very fascinated with ancient texts. So we study them a lot and we talk about them a lot on the podcast. So on the one hand, it seems like these people that in these preceding cultures and some of them built these amazing structures that are still in some ways unexplained, but even ones that didn't seem to have a better understanding of the cosmic environment in which the Earth lives in than our quote unquote modern advanced civilization seems to have. In other words, there's a lot of people in the sort of mainstream view is that, well, cosmic stuff isn't that big of a deal. It only happens once every couple of million years. And so it's interesting to see that. But at the same time, you see the same correlation in the ancient texts where they say things like when Plato's talking about Atlantis or in the story of the Noah's flood, you get this idea of some sort of moral or decadent decay right before something wipes everybody out.
Where we start having hubris and thinking that we're the all-important thing and
Right.
blah, blah, blah.
Right. Well, what was it? Was it in the book of Matthew where one of the, I'm not going to be preaching, biblical sermons here, but there is a lot of, just like all of these ancient texts, whether it's the Bible or the Vedas or the Bundahish or the Tao Te Ching, they all contain wisdom in their own way, right?
Yes,
and they're all
absolutely.
worthy of study.
Yes.
Right, but what was it when one of the disciples asked Jesus, when will we know when the end of the age is coming? And his response was something like this: in the days of Noah, as it was in the days of Noah, when the people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage until the day that the flood came and swept them all away, so will it be again in the days of the coming of the Son of Man.
Right.
Well, I think his point is that people were, it's really the same point that you read in the Hopi mythology, where the cataclysm came on them when they forgot the cosmic plan, when they forgot that they were part of something bigger and they ignored it, and as a consequence, they suffered from that.
Right.
In the Hopi legends, it's, they forgot the plan of the Creator. And
Yes.
because of that, they became vulnerable. And what do we see going on today? I mean, think about 99% of what occupies people's minds and consciousness and their attention.
Right. Eating, drinking,
And,
stuff like that.
yeah, and not that there's anything wrong.
Right.
That's not the point. The point is not that there's anything wrong with eating or drinking or marrying or giving in marriage, because that's the day-to-day stuff that has to go on. The problem becomes when that is the extent of your consciousness.
Right.
Yeah.
The full
And
extent.
the higher
yes.
things of this world and the higher things of life get shunted off to the sidelines and ignored.
Yes.
Because, when going back to the fires, talking about the fires, one of the lessons of those that I find over and over, and I also find this over and over again as I study various disasters of all kinds, right? There's always people that have premonitions.
Yes.
Over and over again. There are people who sense that there's something, right? And generally everybody else is oblivious. But, there are stories like one of the stories of the Great Peshtigo fire was by the Reverend Peter Purdon, and he wrote a very, very interesting account. He was one of the survivors of the Peshtigo fire, and he wrote a very interesting account of his experience coming through that, and it's really a wrenching tale, only because that it's almost impossible to believe, but it's all true.
Yes.
But one of the things that he recounts in there is that even when he saw these portents of this oncoming firestorm, that something was about to happen, he would go through the town there, and he would see that people were just oblivious to it. And like next door to where his church was, he said they were having some kind of a party, and the people were out there, and the ladies were dressed elegantly, and they were laughing and giggling and eating and drinking, right?
Yes.
But not paying attention to these obvious, ominous signs of nature. Then he goes into the town, and the couple of taverns there. There's lumbermen who are coming in, and they're drinking and carousing and having fun and yelling, but totally oblivious. And then, like 2 hours later, these people are all dead.
Right.
And he lived because he was seeing, and people who got this sense that there was this thing coming, they were the ones who made it to the river and survived. The rest of them got roasted.
Right. I was just listening.
Right.
I was just listening to one of your presentations on that, and you said that either he or someone else who was a witness to all this said that there were like a very small percentage of people there who just woke up that morning, and for reasons they couldn't really understand, they started preparing for something to happen.
Yes, and this is a consistent thing that you find out when you begin to study natural disasters or any kind of disaster like that. There seems to be something that some people are sensitive to that tends to give them forewarning.
Yes.
That is wild. Oh my God.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is wild.
So
stuff.
it's difficult. It's difficult now. Like thinking of it nowadays, like we have the internet, and there's just constant. Everyone's just putting every single thing that they're thinking and doing out there. So how do you know who to pay attention to? If you're not one of those sensitive people, but you might know, well, hey, this person kind of has a sense, something's going on.
Well, this is where I think you have to have a well-developed faculty of reason. You have to be able to look at things and weigh evidence, and we are endowed with reason for a purpose. Reason serves a function just like intuition and instinct serves functions, right? So instinct might give you the initial impression, the initial push in a certain direction, into instinct or intuition, but then reason is how you begin to translate that impression into action, see?
Yeah.
So I rely a lot on my own sense of reason and my own sense of what's right or wrong, which is something, if you live a certain way and you have a certain attitude and consciousness about life, I think these are the things you inevitably learn those things if you live long enough,
Yes.
You eventually see enough bullshit that you can recognize it when you're confronted with it,
Absolutely.
And I've seen plenty of it. And once upon a time in my life, I saw it and didn't recognize it for what it was. You see? But part of getting burned as you go through the experience of life is you learn. You get burned and you learn, and then next time you don't get burned.
Yep.
Yeah. So when you were describing, the breaking up of comets and how sometimes it can come all the way down to dust, or even just gases. And and I'm listening to your talks on these fires, and I've always thought the Chicago fire was a strange thing. The whole thing with Miss O'Leary's cow or whatever, it just sounds like crap. And then you look at the explanations that people, or the descriptions that people gave of fire coming out of the sky, or I don't know if it was the Peshtigo fire or the other one you were talking about, where they estimated from the distances that people were able to see the flame column, that the flame column must have been 5 miles tall. That's not a forest fire. That's something else. And so I was wondering if you thought that because I can't remember if you said this or not, maybe you did, but that if it's possible that that the Earth runs into just the gases and dust, and that stuff comes down at meteoric speeds, and when it hits the ground, it's burning, and it just sets everything on fire.
Yeah, I think that probably happens way more frequently than we think, but unless the conditions are right, there's not going to be enough of accumulation of it to ever become flammable. But if you have a period of drought and you have a large fuel load and you have perhaps a high pressure temperature inversion, at the same time you have an influx, you may be able to reach combustible concentrations. I think that would be the way to approach this kind of to thinking about this. Now, the flame column that you referenced, that was the Hinckley fire.
Right, the Hinckley fire.
The Hinckley fire, yeah. And that, my interest in this actually goes back to my childhood because, that's Hinckley, Minnesota, and that's on the route from Minneapolis to Duluth. And frequently with both my parents and my grandparents up there, we made excursions up to Duluth. And I particularly remember my grandmother, who was very interested in this kind of stuff. We would drive through Hinckley, and she would invariably have to tell the story of the Hinckley fire and, how they escaped in the, in the train and all this. This was the Hinckley fire was in September of 1894. The Chicago fire and Peshtigo fire were October 8th of 1871. Here's from The Wall of Flames. This is the account of it by Lawrence H. Larson. It was published by the North Dakota Institute for Regional Studies. It's called The Wall of Flames, the Minnesota Forest Fire of 1894. On the 1st of September 1894, a murderous juggernaut of flames swept through the Minnesota pineries. The huge firestorm, 30 miles wide and 5 miles high, advanced across the land at a rate of 30 miles an hour. It threw fireballs and embers thousands of feet ahead, spawning its own whirlwinds and tornadoes of fire.
God.
So the released fury had the force of multiple Hiroshima-sized atomic bombs. So really, that's what it was like. It was like this. I mean, can you picture something like this?
No.
It's,
that's insane.
It's hard to picture.
Yeah. So, what started this fire? This is from Burning an Empire, 1943, by Stuart H. Holbrook. What started this fire that became such a tremendous sea of flames that took so many lives? As is the case with most other great forest conflagrations, the cause and place of origin will never be known. I have been over every square mile of the country, if not every acre, and have talked with many survivors. I have read hundreds of contemporary reports of eyewitnesses. Nobody knows or ever knew exactly where this fire started.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting poem. This was a poem written by survivor Horace Wilcox, right? This is a short poem. The fire swept o'er us with terrible wrath and left desolation and terror strewed in its path. The flames approached with a sickening crash, and fair Hinckley town disappeared like a flash. But Hinckley saw another sight as the afternoon grew dark as night, when, like the handwriting on the wall, the population recognized Jehovah's call. Fly for your lives, come let us fly, that we may escape the fire that descends from the sky.
Ugh, man. What weren't you I don't remember if this was Hinckley or the Peshtigo or one of the other ones or the Chicago fire, but you talked about there were witnesses that said that like balloon shapes, balls of flame would drop out of the sky and hit people that were hiding in open fields, basically. So they would run to the fields to get away from the fires in the forest and the town. And then these balls of fire would come out of the sky and just incinerate all the people in the field all at once.
All at once, yes. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Yes. Here from this is excerpts from the Ashes, the story of the Hinckley Fire of 1894, and this is quoting a survivor. The fierce flaming heat became so intense in certain localities, it created what seemed to be a vacuum. The vacuum would then quickly fill with violent and explosive gases. With a river so near, there would have been time to seek safety in flight. and even to have removed goods if no greater danger menaced the townspeople than an ordinary forest fire. But when fire burst over the town, it came in fierce explosions and in streaks, with suffocating, choking gases that paralyzed the victims even before the burning. It came too quickly for analysis. It baffled science. It could not be accounted for. It was a phenomenon that defies all description. It did not crawl or creep, but burst and exploded. It roared, seethed, and boiled. On the ground, it swept forward in walls and cylinders of flame, and in the air it soared in massive balls of fire and gas. Its heat was intense and searing, and devoured kingly pines in minutes.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the eyewitnesses from.
Yeah, I remember you saying that they went back and were looking at after the fire was done, and they went back and looked and like at some of the enormous trees that had been these old growth trees. Not only the trees that had survived multiple forest fires before this, multiple forest fires, they went back and looked and like not only the trees were completely gone, but the root balls had been burned completely out of the ground.
Yes, right down in 10, 20 feet into the ground.
Yeah.
So the roots themselves had been utterly consumed.
That's, I have always thought that I'm just like, that's not a regular forest fire. Something else is happening there. Oh man. Well, Randall, this has been fantastic. We don't want to keep you too long. I know you've got a lot of stuff to do. But why don't you?
I've got to get my beauty rest.
Yeah, you got to get your beauty rest, man. So once again, we are going to be. You want to give the layout of the contact at the cabin? Tell it in your own words what we're going to do, and then we'll close the show out.
Well, I'm still, my attention now has shifted. I showed you I was been engaged for the last 6 weeks in trying to get this project finalized and ready for submission, and I think it's there. So I just, it's kind of how I have to work sometimes when I get into these complicated situations. I have to just kind of put everything aside and just focus on the one thing. That's kind of where I've been. So I'm kind of now turning to really mapping out in detail what we're going to do from day to day, where we're going to go. And the more I'm getting into it, the more interesting it's sounding because I'm learning things. See, this will be a little different because this will be more like a recon. This will be because some of the areas we'll be going, I haven't gone yet. They're on my list of things that I need to investigate, but I have not yet. Now, some of the places I've been, like Chimney Rock, I've been there a couple of times. So yeah, I will be able to give a nice presentation on Chimney Rock and what's going on there, what its connection is to the whole Chaco and infrastructure in the San Juan Basin, how its astronomy worked, and then we'd be able to go out and see it firsthand.
Yeah,
we will certainly go to Mesa Verde, and I'm looking at some other places as well that's within a reasonable drive. I think we probably take a trip up the Animas River because there are some giant catastrophic flood terraces that I think would be very interesting to look at.
Awesome.
So over the next week or two, I'm really going to be getting down, crunching the numbers and studying the maps and figuring out routes and doing all of that stuff with my buddy Brad, who of course helps me with that end of the thing.
Right.
All right, cool. Well, we'll keep our listeners updated as we learn more every Monday.
That's right.
We do our conference, so
yeah,
it's we're really looking forward to it. So,
cool. So am I.
Thanks a lot for coming on, and we'll be talking to you soon, sir.
Great. Yeah, next Monday, I guess.
That's right.
May we all take our faculties and use our reason and do the wise thing.
That's right. And go to Pagosa Springs and do Snake Rose Snake Force Recon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Randall.
Right.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Hey, so long, guys.
Bye. All right. That was our interview with Randall Carlson.
It was part one. So we had this crazy stuff happen where we end up having to call on the phone, and then we couldn't get the watcher on because, of course, as you all know, we use the phone as the internet connection.
Yes.
And there are other interesting parts of why it wasn't working, but we're not going to get into that. Basically, what we decided to do in the first break was add the watcher as a three-way call, and he just muted his phone. So he was able to really listen in for the whole second half of the show. Randall hangs up, and we start talking with the watcher afterwards. I stop the recording. And then I guess we didn't get the manual for three-way calling, but it called Randall's phone back.
Yeah, it automatically, apparently, this is what happened. We're talking with the watcher. We're talking inside baseball. We're explaining to him the technical difficulties we were having, but we were saying like, dude, but it was awesome because it's Randall Carlson and he did a great job and the interview was great. And then the watcher starts talking to us about some of the stuff that Randall was talking about at the end there with the fires. And then suddenly at some point we all take a break to think about what we're saying, and then we hear Randall's voice. Can you guys hear me? And we're just like, because apparently if you're on a three-way call with somebody and one person hangs up, but you, as the initiator of the three-way call, don't then hang up the call and you stay on the line with the other guy in the three-way call, the phone automatically calls the person who hung up. It calls them back.
My theory is only on landlines.
Yeah, it could be that.
But anyway.
So Randall picked the phone up at some unknown point and was listening to us talk with the watcher, and eventually he told us like, can you guys hear me? And we're just like, holy crap. So then he had heard the stuff that the watcher was saying about his family being from one of the places where the fires were. I can't remember the name of it, and he just went right back into explaining stuff, and we got
and so I hit record and
we got like a sequel. So that's what we're going to play for you right now.
He asked us, is this round two? So here you go, round two.
Sounds supernatural. Like they've gotten to the point now where none of the people who lived through the fire are still there, so it almost sounds like fanciful tales.
Right.
Because it's that unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does begin to sound like the supernatural. It really does. I mean, when I was, let's see, what year? I guess we went up there in 1995 is when I went up there. When we were researching for this, I was consultant on a show that was shown on TBS and CNN about 6 or 8 times back in 96 and 97 called Fire from the Sky.
Mm-hmm.
So I went up there and we interviewed, I don't remember his name, Robert, somebody who was curator of the museum at the time. And he let me have access to a bunch of these unpublished accounts and stuff.
Oh,
and
wow.
Really amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
Wow.
So I have a lot of that's into my my multimedia presentation on the fires, the cosmic firestorms. In fact, just by coincidence, yesterday, near where I live, there's a used bookstore, and they get people drop off books all the time there, and they put a shelf outside of books that just kind of overflow books that they think that they're not going to sell. And I was there, and I happened to look, and I saw one called The Big Burn, and it was about this massive another one of these cosmic firestorms, only this one was western Montana, northern Idaho, back in 1910. And so I just started reading into that book a little bit last night by coincidence. And that in fact, I do have that firestorm as the final firestorm. I've got 6 or 7 of those firestorms in my multimedia presentation, going back to this one that was in New Brunswick back in the 1830s. Then I end with the one in the Big Burn in 1910. So what's unique is that each one of these firestorms has very similar type of phenomena. You know, fire from the sky, supernatural kind of things associated with it, these extraordinary stories of just the bizarre effects, you know, where literally somebody will be unscathed and 10 feet away from them. Somebody is reduced to a pile of ashes.
And didn't you say that in some cases at least they start like practically on the same day? I mean, like different years, but like in October at 9 o'clock, basically on practically the same day.
Yeah. Well, both Peshtigo, the biggest fire in Michigan, which is the Ministy, I think is how they pronounce it, Ministy fire, the Chicago fire, and the Wisconsin fire in Peshtigo, all three started Sunday night, around within 1 hour of each other, as best they can tell, around 9 o'clock.
That's crazy.
On October 8th, 1871. So now, were you guys, do you remember this? Wildfires ravage Northern California with shocking speed. Santa Rosa, California, this is, 2017.
Yes.
An onslaught of wildfires across a wide swath of Northern California broke out almost simultaneously, then grew exponentially, swallowing up properties from wineries to trailer parks and tearing through both tiny rural towns and urban subdivisions.
Yes.
So, and then there was these huge fires that just consumed Napa Valley.
Yep.
Right? More than 5,700 homes and other structures destroyed, 90,000 people evacuated. The cause of the fires remained under investigation on Monday. So now get this. When was the Chicago fire?
It was in October?
October what? What date? It was a Sunday.
8th?
Russ is
October
guessing.
8th. October 8th, right? So if we go back to this early firestorm, the first one that I document it was the Great Miramichi fire. And this is way back, this was 1825. The first forest fire of catastrophic size to get into North American history swept the wild Miramichi River Valley of New Brunswick in October of 1825. Although this was a Canadian fire, the worst the Dominion has ever experienced. And here's the key. Other forest fires on the same day were taking a heavy toll of timber and farm property in nearby Maine. Now, the date of this fire was October 9th. So only one, October 7th. So it was only one day different than the Peshtigo, Chicago, Manistee fire.
Wow.
Right? So now, go back down to the Napa Valley fire, and I will read you this, and I think you'll begin to see how interesting. Let's see. So the inferno swept up over a wooded ridge like many California wildfires do, but this one was different. Like a tear in the night, this wall of wind-whipped flames took direct aim for the heart of a city. Not just the rural outskirts, not just the homes high in the hills or off the grid. The Tubbs fire, one of 14 wildfires that scarred the people and property of 8 Northern California counties late Sunday, right? So this is Sunday. As I said, they broke out like an onslaught of fires across a wide swath of Northern California broke out almost simultaneously. And what was the date of those fires? Here's the www.businessinsider.com. Quoting, a series of fires sparked in the Napa Valley on October 8th.
Oh, my God.
And grew as the powerful winds pulled the flames across fields and freeways, etc.
Holy crap.
And we need to chart these out on a map to see the trajectory over the years.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Is that something plausible? Oh,
yeah, I think so, yeah. At least 15 people have died in Northern California after what officials are describing as an unprecedented wildfire that has already destroyed 2,000 structures and devastated large swaths of the wine country. Quoting the fire captain spokeswoman for CAL FIRE, the state agency responsible for fire protection. This is quoting her. We often have multiple fires going on, but the majority of these fires all started right around the same time period, same time of night. It's unprecedented.
Oh, my God.
Oh, man.
So just as an interesting point of reference, the date of the peak of the Draconid meteor shower is October 8th.
Oh,
Yes.
wow.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, Brett. I wasn't going to mention that, but since you figured it out on your own, yeah, that's exactly right.
That's
now, think
why
about
we
that.
call
Think
him the
about
Watcher.
All right, Mr. Watcher. Think about the imagery here.
The dragons.
Why is it called the Draconid meteor shower, right? Because all meteor showers are named after the radiant point from which they emanate in space. Now, let me tell you this. The Draconid meteor shower is the big constellation of Draco, the cosmic serpent. The radiant point of the Draconid meteor shower, which peaks on October 8th, is directly targeted on the mouth of the serpent. So here we have the fire-breathing dragon.
Oh my God.
Fucking wow.
Holy crap. That was a great sequel, Randall.
All right, well, I'll let you guys sleep on that one then. So
All right.
Snake
I'm
Bros.
going to sign off.
All right. Thanks, man.
We'll hang up this
we
time.
promise we won't call you again.
Okay. All right. Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Awesome.
All right. There you go, round two.
That's right. 2 interviews with Randall Carlson in one show. Ladies and gentlemen.
All right. You guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. You can visit the website at brothersoftheserpent.com. Check out the snake skins and the encyclopedia and the glossary. All that
right.
good stuff.
Follow us on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. And don't forget to share the shows. And if you can, donate to our pyramid scheme to send us straight to pyramids.
Straight to pyramids.
Send us pie, $3.14. We love it.
And if you can't do that, at least give us a review. Very much appreciated to all of you who have done so and all of the donations. We
That's
love
right.
you guys.
We love you guys so much. Also, don't forget about History Shift at History Shift on Twitter, and look him up on YouTube because he has been making all of our YouTube videos, and he is nearly done with our entire back catalog of shows.
Wow.
Yes. So thanks so much to that guy. And also, I want to give, he has been doing some amazing research. He's in Montana. He's been doing some amazing research into glacial erratics and dolmen-looking things that are out there, trying to find out if they're man-made or whatever. He's been going on these hikes, and he requested that we find out if anybody from in that area would like to join him and go out on these Snake Bros, Snake Fours scouting things for dolmens.
Yes,
So,
do it.
Look, if anybody lives around there and you want to do that, look up History Shift on Twitter and get a hold of him because he wants buddies to make sure that he doesn't die when he's out there looking for dolmens. Okay?
Yep. Also, if you want beautiful, great sounding acoustic panels for your studio or your podcast studio or your living room, look up or actually send an email to our friend Kmart at acousticpanelingsolutions@gmail.com.
That's right. And all of this with Randall Carlson was set up because we signed up to go to the Contact at the Cabin, which we talked about during the show with Randall, but I just want to reiterate. We are going to Contact at the Cabin. We will be there for the entirety of that conference. It's a very small, basically 25 people per session. There's 3 sessions. So if you guys want to go do that and be there with us and Randall Carlson and the dudes from Grimerica and a whole bunch of other people that are interested in this stuff, sign up. The spots are going fast, people, so sign up now.
Yeah. And we want a special thanks to Grimerica for setting up that whole thing. And
That's right.
all the people that are working on it, getting everything done. There's a lot of details to work out, and everybody's doing a great job, and we really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
we appreciate the opportunity.
And we are so happy to be a part of this crew. So
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
thank you guys. We love you, Adamu. Get back to work. Randall Carlson.